haven't talked to you since the former president was found guilty of 34 felonies. And
Actually, we did. We talked to her on Friday. We haven't talked to her since immediately after the
well,
charge.
in person, in a
Oh,
sensitive kind of
okay.
way. And now you're here today. We did talk to you briefly on Friday, as Jim said. But since then, there's been kind of a nonstop trashing of the judiciary. I mean, you're a lawyer, not only by Trump, but by a lot of people in the GOP. So, what do you think? Do you think this hurts people's faith in the courts, or is this just seen as politics as usual, and this is the way it goes?
I'd like to think that most people would see this as politics as usual, which is unfortunate. In this context, and I stressed this, on Friday. Not only do I respect the judicial process, it was fair here. Equal justice under the law applies to presidents, and it applies, of course, to Trump as well. And here you had a fair process where the prosecutor's side presented their case fairly. He also had a defense, and he presented his defense fairly. And then the jury of his peers went back thoughtfully. Let me tell you, if you ever participated in jury duty, it's your civic obligation. Folks take this role very seriously. They went back and they did their process, which was fair. And they came back with a decision that we should all respect. He has avenues available to him in this judicial process that he will take full advantage of, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, it was a process that was fair. And like I stressed on Friday, this is someone who has demonstrated that the law applies to other people and not him. And the first time he's been held accountable for wrongdoing. And I lifted up some racial justice, I think, examples, including everything related to the Central Park Five, him and his father discriminating against black tenants. I think things that are often lost when talking about this former president that people shouldn't forget. Everyone, if they are accused of something, goes through a process and should be held accountable. It should be no different if you have power, stature, or money. And he's trying to use all of those to get a different outcome, and to suggest the process is a sham. It is not. And hopefully people go to the ballot box and reelect President Biden and Harris, who we absolutely need as a partner when it comes to the things we're trying to accomplish here in Massachusetts.
Speaking of what we're trying to accomplish in Massachusetts, we're speaking to the Attorney General. Her number, if you want to speak to her, ask her a question, is 877-301-8970. That's either to call or text. You've just appointed a head of your housing affordability unit. What's the mission? What do you hope to achieve? We're going to talk about the legislature is attempting to do and what Governor Healy's attempting to do in a minute. But what is the Attorney General's office mission, Attorney General?
So just taking a step back, I wanted to make it clear that I, along with the team at the AG's office, are going to focus on this housing crisis. I just last week spent time at a manufactured housing home in Taunton. Was also in Salem, talking about their enforcement of the MBTA communities law, was in Leominster, a part of a housing development, or housing, or I should say a property that was suffering significant blight, where our neighborhood renewal division has now turned that into a place that people can rent, and it is going to be accessible and affordable. So why are we doing all this? Because we are absolutely in a housing crisis, as demonstrated by the calls we get to our office. And not just about I'm looking for a home, also people suffering discrimination or bias in the process. And the last I checked, when looking at the numbers, and even I had to double check, it's close to almost $1 million to be able to buy a home in Massachusetts. That is absolutely absurd and unacceptable. And there's a role the AG's office can play in that. And so this new housing affordability unit is to demonstrate to the world that we're going to play a role. We want to work with municipalities and various stakeholders to make sure that, as we are talking about land use and zoning laws, we're offering that technical assistance, which we are doing in the context of MBTA communities law, but it's bigger than that in order to bring about more housing. The other piece that is important is not only this external engagement to help with the crisis, is to make sure the work we do in the office is not siloed. So if we're doing the discrimination and bias work and making sure that folks are not discriminated as they are seeking housing and applying for mortgages or tenant seeking opportunities, that's one piece of our work in the Civil Rights Division, Consumer Protection Division. And then we have our municipal law unit that is doing enforcement of the MBTA communities law. We have our neighborhood renewal division. We have all these divisions that have to come together. So Esme, who is the new director of this unit, will have a tall order in making sure that work isn't siloed. And if we do it collectively really well with the legislature and administration, we can solve this housing crisis going forward.
One of the things that I was disappointed in anyway is that the House, at least, and we'll see maybe if the Senate does something different, but in their new this $6.2 billion housing bond bill, they eliminated this 2% real estate sales tax on houses that sold for more than $1 million. And when I was reading further into the story, it said that Provincetown asked to do this back in 2011. Nantucket did in 2016. In Boston, I believe we would have, if we had passed this, according to Mayor Wu, we would have saved millions of dollars already to put toward housing. We can't do this because it's a home rule kind of deal where the state rules about the towns. And even if towns want to do it, they can't do it without the approval of the legislature. That's a long-winded question. But the point is, what do you think about the real estate transfer tax?
I've been on the record in support of it from my city council days. I was on the city council with, I want to say, Senator Edwards, then Councilor Edwards, maybe even Janie at the time. I'm trying to remember who all the sponsors were. But I think everyone on the council at that time supported it because we knew we were in a housing crisis then and saw it as additional resources in revenue that could be used to create more housing and to address the supply issue. And so that position hasn't changed. And there are other provisions that we want to see. It's not just about the supply piece. It is about access and quality of housing too. So I mentioned our neighborhood renewal division. That's quality of housing is important. Access piece, people are applying for different opportunities is critically important. In addition to the revenue piece, so we support it all.
Can we step back from this for a second? The underlying point, which we've talked about a lot, I think, with you, is I understand they have the statutory power. Where does the legislature get off, other than this ego trip, saying the duly elected people of your hometown said they want it. They're not mandating it. That's not being requested by Governor Healy or Mayor Wu. As Marjorie said, the people of Provincetown, the people of Nantucket. What's your reaction to them deciding the small d democratically elected people of a particular community don't have the power to do what they want to do without a sign-off from some state rep from Fitchburg? I mean, seriously.
The home rule petition process, I think, has flaws and always has, and that's in the context not just of this of
liquor licenses.
Exactly. I think people have consistently questioned that because, like you said, we have a municipality where you have full support, not just say of the elected body, but also say the constituents themselves who want to see something happen. And I think this is where, at least from where I sit now, advocacy is really important. I'm gonna be at CHAPA. I think it's tomorrow night. Thousands of people will show up at that event to celebrate housing accomplishments by community-based organizations. I feel honored that I'm being honored at this event, but I think it's just a reminder that collective advocacy is important. Showing up at the State House is important. Emailing and calling and texting your elected officials saying, I support this, that's what we need at this stage.
Well, maybe they should check their egos at the door. Maybe that.
I'll let you tell them.
Okay, well, can I continue? I want to just continue.
Protections too.
In this terrific piece in the Globe about this bond bill, and by the way, they deserve credit. They increased from $4 to $6 billion the amount. But listen to this in terms of tenants, and you may not say this, we will. It's because they have so many developers and landlords in the legislature. Listen to this. We know that rent control died, even though the people of Boston won it by more than a 2/3 margin. The right of first refusal, if your landlord is going to sell your building, that's dead. The sealing of renters' eviction records, that's dead. The lowering the local voting threshold for inclusionary zoning from 2/3 to simple majority is dead. Essentially, what they did here is they stripped virtually every tenant protection from this bill. That maybe there's one or two that I missed. But what's your reaction to that?
So I will tell you, I share some of your frustration. What I mean by that is, as we were developing our strategic plan for the office, we looked at all the tools that we have in the office because a lot of folks don't know what they are. One is our enforcement litigation tools. Most know that. But the other one that is equally powerful is our legislative tools. Being able to go to the State House or anywhere else to push for legislative changes so that we can solve a problem. It shows up in the competitive electric supply. We've done what we can on enforcement. Unless there's a legislative fix, more poor people of color will suffer significant losses. That's guaranteed. And we're going back and forth. And I wish we didn't have to go back and forth, right? I wish we could come to a place of understanding, remove some lobbyists and anyone else who stand in the way of us doing what's necessary for constituents. On the housing piece, this is critical. There are some pieces in here that I hope the Senate will take up. We will do our part to advocate for, including around the eviction processes. What came up in a very powerful tour and meeting with leadership in Salem was not just their incredible enforcement of the MBTA communities law and how they're doing that, I would say almost effortlessly, but with a community-driven approach. The folks who are doing their housing work are absolutely concerned about folks who are being evicted, who don't have access to counsel and the resources that are required there. Salem is able to offer some resources there, but we know every municipality can't. And you're seeing cases where people have legitimate causes of action to say, I shouldn't be evicted, and are being moved out because they don't have access to counsel. The other piece is, we know if you have a flawed process in some way where you have an eviction that ends up on your record, it will be used against you for a long period of time. And so this automatic sealing is critical in this space, because usually it's poor folks, women, people of color that have these records that are holding them back and standing at significant barriers and sometimes permanent barriers for them accessing housing. And the last I checked, it's more difficult to address the homeless crisis than it is unhoused, right? We want to get people housed, keep them housed. And there's a way to do that while respecting those rights of owners and landlords. But these pieces around eviction sealing, access to counsel, our office firmly believes they need to be a part of the housing bill. So we'll get up there and advocate. But I share some of that frustration, and I want folks to know that we're doing everything we can to advocate as best we can for the changes we would need to see legislatively to help folks with respect to our issues.
Before we get to the calls, there's actually a renter's question we'll get to first. As you made clear before, this is only the House version.
That's
Senate
right.
still has to
Senate
take
could
it up.
do something.
Contact your state senator. If you're happy, tell them you're happy. If you're not, tell them what you'd like change. Regina and Quincy, you're first with the Attorney General of the Commonwealth, Andrea Campbell. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. AG Campbell, I have a question in regards to what you guys were just talking about, and that is renter protection. And I think Jim had mentioned that we really don't. But in addition to that, it is what is going. I just recently moved, and it is brutal out there in terms of not only just the rent, but what the not all, but what a lot of landlords are making the tenant pay. So a lot of times, at least the last time which was many moons ago in terms of rented, I never have to pay for water and sewage. That is now renters have to pay. There's no snow removal, there's no garbage removal, there's no laundry facilities, or they provide you hookup and the tenant has to bring their own washer and dryer. Now, if you're renting, who has a washer and dryer? There's no parking spaces, or if there is a parking space, they make you pay for the parking space.
So, Regina, if I may, what's the question at the end of this for the Attorney General?
So what is, I guess, legislation doing to protect the tenant from having all these expenses that the landlord is passing on to the tenant? Mm-hmm. It should be stopped because, again, it's almost as if we're the homeowner, but we have no equity.
It's a great question.
And the reason why
No, it's a great question. I think you made it incredibly clear, Regina. Let the Attorney General respond. Thank you for your call.
Thank you, Regina, for your question. A couple of things. I'm going to encourage folks, because I know folks listen to both of you in this program, to follow us at Mass AGO. Because why? We do our best to put out guidelines and guidance, even videos, me speaking direct to camera, as much as I don't like doing that. Because it feels strange, I'm talking to someone.
Now, actually.
Exactly. But at least
at
least you're across from me, so I'm talking to you versus the camera.
We don't have any cameras in
here.
here.
What is that called?
There is
that's
a camera.
Good point.
Okay,
sorry about that. Hi, Howard.
Howard is our videographer who actually happens to be here.
Howard's not only is there a camera here, Howard is here, but
Howard is here.
We digress.
Look at Howard. Yeah. I'm sorry, Attorney General.
God bless Howard and all of us. But why I say that is Caitlin, who does our digital work and on our comms team, you often see Molly, but we have a comms team, small and mighty, put out content and videos on what are you responsible for as a tenant, first, last, the state sanitary code. So there are laws in place that offer significant protection. In the context of Regina, I would say, I don't know if we can actually get her back because
She's still on hold. Regina,
So,
stay on hold.
yes,
We want your
because-
contact info.
absolutely,
Don't go
because
away.
Lauren and Cindy from the team are here because depending on where you live, if it's a condo association you own, if you're renting, if you have a certain lease, it depends. Certain costs, water, sewer, should not necessarily be on the tenant, but it depends on some different arrangements that may be in place. So we can talk to Regina specifically, but on our website, but also on social media platforms, we do our best to put out content so people can get these questions answered. And there are already laws in place that allow for some of these protections where you don't have to bear these costs. And if folks think they are bearing costs that they shouldn't, to reach out to our office.
Great.
People may know that Steward Hospital, I think they run 8 or 9 hospitals in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They're in bankruptcy. The guy that ran the place, dilatory, he's the one with the 2 big, huge yachts. I think he's got a 140-foot yacht and a 90-foot fishing boat, so he's done very well. Anyway, we have a question here for the Attorney General from an ER nurse at Holy Family Hospital in Haverhill. She says there's speculation that not all the Steward hospitals will have buyers in the upcoming auction. What is the state plan B for the hospitals that do not sell? Does the state have the ability to take the land by eminent domain to make these hospitals more desirable? I've seen Steward strip services, an adult psychiatric floor closed, the ICU closed, meaning ICU patients here are cared in the ER until a placement is found.
Did she say her name?
No.
No. Well, I got to first start by just thanking this ER nurse and every provider, every nurse, everyone who is showing up at these facilities to continue to provide care. I have the Kearney, which I have told folks is right up the street from me. It's where we bring our boys if there's an emergency situation, and I was recently there and just walked around and didn't tell folks who I was just to get a sense of what was going on, and people are providing care at these facilities. Of course, under the oversight of DPH and Health and Human Services, there are monitors in place to make sure it's high quality care. Our focus is a couple of things. One is continuing to work with the administration. They are at the point in ensuring that care is high quality, that it's safe. That's DPH, that's the governor's team, and we're supporting them any way we can. They also are the point in many ways in terms of conversations on who could buy, etc. Where our office plays a role, AG, us, we have inserted ourselves in these bankruptcy proceedings, which are taking place in Texas. Actually, kudos to us, and I'm going to pat Massachusetts on the back because we were the only state to intervene and put ourselves in the middle of all this. They have facilities in Texas and also in Florida, for example, other places. We remain in contact with those offices, and frankly, even these offices that have Republican AGs, we don't care what party you're from. We're actively working together to make sure our folks have access to health care and that we hold Steward accountable. In the bankruptcy proceedings, we're advocating for the providers and patients. We just got a patient ombudsman appointed that will oversee our facilities here in Massachusetts, complement that high quality work and make sure that the providers are being paid, the patients are getting high quality care. That role is important. We had to advocate for that. We now have that. And we had to do it through the bankruptcy proceedings. The second is this timeline. There's a timeline now through July where Steward is working hard to get more funding. There's a possibility they have some more funding that will come available to them, as well as a really fast timeline to get buyers in to take over these facilities. That's a good thing. Of course, we understand, and I'm not naive to the fact, and I've said this before, that we have to find buyers. We have to find people who are suitable to take over these institutions. That's going to take some time. I will say Steward is doing their part. And why? I wouldn't just say they're doing their part because they feel like it. Ralph is not in the picture. There's another group of leaders that are making the decisions, which have been helpful and provided more transparency on their finances, etc. But the best thing about this bankruptcy proceeding is we have a judge now involved. There's a court involved watching everything that is being done, crossing T's, dotting I's. As we insert ourselves in the sales process, the AG's office is making sure that we're making clear to the court that all the laws that we have to review any transaction, that it is applicable here. So we'll keep people abreast. It is our hope and goal, even though it's not necessarily directly in our purview, We review the transaction. We don't go out and get the buyer.
So what happens,
But
as the ER nurse said, what happens if there isn't a buyer for a particular hospital in Massachusetts? What do you do then?
So that's our push, but we work with the administration to make sure we can continue to provide care. I will say that that is the purview of Department of Health and Health and Human Services. They have been doing this capacity analysis, etc. They're continuing to follow and stay in communication with folks to make sure that there is no gaps in terms of access to care. But I have said publicly, including in some videos, DTCs, direct to camera, that I'm not naive to the fact that there is a real possibility that some operations at some facilities may have to wind down. I have no idea what that's going to look like. This is unprecedented for me. This is unprecedented for the office. But what I want to stress to that ER provider, to patients, to every constituent, that we're going to do everything in our power to fight on behalf of them, to work with the health team under the governor and lieutenant governor in terms of access to care. And even if they don't get a buyer, to still make sure they have access to care that is high quality from somewhere. I'm inserting myself a bit there, but the other piece is equally important. We will also hold Steward accountable. We need time to do that. We will review everything that's possible, but we need time to do that analysis and to come back to the public on that accountability piece.
Well, I want to ask you about the accountability. We discussed, right after this happened, one of us, I don't know who, I'm sure you've been asked by a lot of people, we asked you, is there potential criminal liability for dilatory? And as I'm sure if I asked you the question, I said at the time, well, I'm not much of a lawyer. It seems to me that when you read in the Boston Globe that life-saving equipment was repossessed because they didn't pay the bill, at the same time that dilatory is taking out tens of millions of dollars to buy yachts and other things, there seems to be some connection. And what I believe you said at the time, Attorney General, everything is on the table.
That's right.
Is there an investigation of possible criminal liability on the part of dilatory?
Everything is on the table. And, on my city council days, I could say whatever the heck I wanted. I can't do that now as Attorney General. There are processes in place, to our former president's point. There are processes that have to be followed. People have rights, et cetera, et cetera. But let me tell you this. We will do not only a robust analysis, we will look at everything. And the benefit of the bankruptcy proceeding is not only we've inserted ourselves, we're in it. Mm-hmm. We get access to information that we can't share publicly, but that could be useful to an accountability review. And the public, please know, including those providers that are working every day in these facilities, we will come back to them once we complete that review on how we're going to hold folks accountable. The other piece that I have to stress is it can be difficult for the average person to understand what is the role of the AG's office, what is the role of the governor, Department of Public Health, Health and Human Services. While we work in partnership on this question of keeping facilities closed, shut, continuing care, eminent domain, if a place winds down their operations, where do people go? That's DPH. That's the state. That's not the AGO. But we're going to do everything that we can to support them in these efforts because this is a crisis that affects all of us.
Paul from Cambridge, you've been very patient. You're on with the Attorney General. Hi, Paul. Paul.
Good morning.
Hi.
Good morning.
Welcome.
The connection on my end is pretty bad, so I'm going to hopefully ask my question and then listen off air on the radio.
Sure.
Want to thank all three of you for your public service. Really appreciate it. I hired a company to remediate asbestos in my home in the basement. I was doing some construction and wanted to put in a new heat pump.
By the way, I would say, Paul, don't jump off quickly. We can hear you.
Yeah, we hear
fine.
you perfectly. That's a great point. So do stick around, but continue, Paul. Go ahead.
So they performed the work and further contaminated the basement and the first floor of my house. And I ended up engaging an independent industrial hygienist who confirmed there was asbestos in the living area. I had to vacate the house, and the company is denying responsibility. I had retained an attorney. A great expense. I ended up having to pay about $60,000 to remediate, and the DEP got involved. It's a long tale, but in the end, my mother had passed away, left me some money that was going to pay for the work, and I ended up spending almost all of it on the remediation, and now having difficulty moving forward with keeping the attorney. And I wondered if there's anything the Attorney General's office can do that won't cost me an arm and a leg.
So, Paul, one, you should absolutely stay on. Let's definitely
Please.
continue the conversation. We have active cases. It almost feels like every single day with respect to asbestos. And we have an environmental strike force literally assigned with officers and others that go out and investigate and hold subcontractors, contractors, municipalities accountable every day for the removal of asbestos and doing it properly. And sadly, in certain communities, it doesn't happen. And so we are doing more than just citing folks. There is active and aggressive enforcement here. So I just want to say that to the public. If you have any concerns in your community that you see with respect to asbestos, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office. On our website, we also have a Health at Home website that is new, recently designed by our Energy and Environmental Bureau folks. User-friendly, so people have a sense of what their rights are, etc., what their protections are. Health at Home at the web is on our website. Please do take a look because we think that's useful in terms of offering information too.
Paul, don't go away. We're going to get your
Yes.
contact
And
information
sorry to hear that, Paul.
and share it with the
You know,
Attorney General.
one quick thing about asbestos and lead paint. Anecdotally, and you read these stories sometimes in the paper, and I know about my own life, people that have tried to get asbestos removed or lead paint removed wound up in a much worse place because even if they were reasonably competent, some asbestos dust gets in the air, some lead paint dust gets in the backyard. That maybe we are going about that. Maybe we'd be better off just wrapping up the asbestos and painting over the lead paint in a way that it wasn't able to be eaten by kids instead of spending thousands of dollars and then being in even worse shape.
I would just say it's unacceptable that anyone, if you hire someone who says they have the expertise to remove asbestos, to deal with lead paint issues, that they don't do that 100% accurately and frankly compliant with our laws. We have active cases, not only when it comes to asbestos, the same thing with lead paint. And traditionally you're seeing some of these cases in communities, environmental justice communities.
Right.
Communities that have for years dealt with the brunt of environmental concerns, including communities even just in Fall River, where you're seeing asbestos just dumped in a municipality in the town or the community as a whole has to deal with the impact of that. But luckily, I have a dedicated team of folks who are taking on these cases every single day, aggressive in their enforcement, not only in asbestos, but also lead paint issues and all things related to the environment. And so when people talk about climate justice, why they should care, this is climate justice. This is environmental justice. This is also economic justice, as just described by Paul. So if folks have questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office. You can file a complaint. You can check out the Health at Home website for more information and details. And if anything sort of comes up, our team is happy to respond.
You know, one quick thing before we get to the break. You have an incredible life story. I know you lost your mom. You spent some time in foster care. You lost your twin brother, who was in waiting a trial in prison. Died. I think it was 29 or so. He was pretty young. Now, BUR has done a long story about another brother who's been accused of rape multiple times. Before we get to what they were talking about, whether it helped that he was your brother, it's kind of surprising. You got yourself into Boston Latin, you got yourself into Princeton, you became a lawyer on the city council. Now you're the first woman of color to be the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and you've had two other brothers that really struggled. So, how'd that happen?
First of all, I have to just take a step back. I appreciate your frame on the question, Marjorie, and not just the frame, how you asked your question. Because I often remark to my team, when it comes to the media generally, you have such a significant role in how you ask the question, how you go after the work that you're doing. And as I made it crystal clear in the context of that story, and I think some really unfair journalism, at no point did I have any role or play any role whatsoever in the horrific and depressing and sad allegations. And I have never minced my words from the very beginning when I learned about those allegations, that I not only stand with victims and survivors, that I believe women. I've made that crystal clear from the beginning. And that at the same time, someone can be afforded a fair judicial process to be able to make their case. And what was lost, I think, in some of this coverage is I have always been open and vulnerable about my past and my story and my struggles, because I think, one, is powerful to me. I use it every day to serve other families and other constituents so they can break cycles of poverty, criminalization, and trauma for themselves. And I use government tools to allow them to do that. The second piece why I do it is I think it's important for young people. We have so many young people who have loved ones who are incarcerated, who have been arrested, who are on drugs or substance use disorder or struggling with something, mental health challenges, and who feel a sense of shame almost in sharing their story, and sharing how that is affecting them. I was just at Project 351 on Sunday, incredible organization with youth and young leaders in service from 351 municipalities in Massachusetts, who after that event reached out to us on social media to say thank you so much for sharing pieces of your story, because it inspires them to do the same. Sharing freely about my faith, which has also got me to this place too. And so I know who I am. I know what I stand for. I operate with integrity and exceptionalism in the work, because that's what my constituents deserve. That won't change. And if anything, I feel really blessed to be the Attorney General of this great state, because I get to turn pain into purpose every single day, and to make sure that victims, survivors have everything they would need to be supported during some horrific times, and to just make sure that those living in poor communities, people of color, Black folk, and anybody else feel seen and heard and has the tools they would need to be, I'll put in quotes, successful like me and have opportunity to reach their dreams.
Before I go to a break, how hard is this for you?
It can be very hard. I will say it was in the beginning, whether the loss of my twin brother Andre or any other traumatic event, you get news that you don't welcome. You don't want to hear that your loved one's been arrested. You don't want to hear these things. They're painful. And at the end of the day, though, I have such a deep sense of faith. I start my day in prayer, meditation. My Bible means something to me, and I wear that on my sleeve. And that's my foundation. My family, my husband, and my kids, and my faith are my foundation. And I know if there's any cracks in that, I'm in trouble. But because I have a solid foundation and a great group of folks, of friends, and team members that surround me, I'm able to wake up every day with a sense of joy and to do the work. And I will say, even with flawed coverage of different things, I go, bring it on, because at the end of the day, I'm here to do meaningful work for people, to put politics over people, and to make sure it's done with integrity and exceptionalism.
If I may, though, just briefly before we break, I read the VOR story too, which is quite at length. I don't believe that they accuse you of intervening either as a city council or attorney general. They raise an issue which, respectfully, I think is a legitimate. Do you not think that's a legitimate question to ask you? You just said you haven't had any involvement, but don't you think that's a legitimate question for a reporter to ask you about your brother's case?
I think when there was coverage at different stages, and on some part of it, they included my statement and response along with the district attorneys. In other coverage, they eliminated all of that. And to the point where people were left with some implication, for example. And I got outreach saying, what's going on? Because in subsequent coverage, national media coverage.
Oh, I see. But it's in the BUR story.
There was none.
Okay.
So, but I will say, for me, that's not responsible journalism. And we've called that out.
Understood.
But one thing, though, when you go talk to these groups, you're a woman. Maybe that makes a difference. Maybe you had a mentor or a foster mother or somebody in third grade or something. Your trajectory is so different. And I wonder, and you mentioned your faith, what is that about? Because you don't usually see that in families. You do, but
different and disparate sort of paths and outcomes.
Yeah.
I actually think, being on the city council, obviously in Boston and representing largely Dorchester, Mattapan, I had a little bit of Jamaica Plain and Rosendale. I did hear those stories. Even when I campaigned, it resonated with grandparents and parents who said, I have, 3 kids, and one is incarcerated, the other 2 are in college. It resonates with siblings. I get folks who said, I have a twin, and my twin is not doing well. Every family, I would guess, based on the crisis we're seeing, whether it's the opioid crisis or whatever crisis it is, can point to a relative who is struggling, who is incarcerated, or something going on in that family where maybe they feel free to talk about it, maybe they don't. I hope that people, for me, to sit here today where I am, sharing my story, as I said, offers power, not just to me, but to other folks to do the same. I also think it informs how I do the work, why I focus on criminal legal reform, prison reform, addressing poverty and homelessness for everyone, not just communities of color, anyone. And also why I focus on those folks who just feel left out and left behind. I would also add, and to your point, I do understand media and your job is to probe and ask the questions and to investigate. I just ask that it's fair, responsible. And I would just add, if I weren't probably in this role, I don't know that certain type of coverage would have even happened, right? Yeah. And so, and I want to be mindful of that because I also got outreach from folks who are folks of color who look at coverage in media, who study this and have questions about bias, et cetera, and push entities to be mindful of that. We have to do the same in our office as we take on cases and take on policy changes to make sure we're being thoughtful and inclusive and pushing away any bias or subjectivity in that process.
You know, before we take a break, since you just mentioned Project 351 in passing, which is a spectacular organization started by Governor Patrick, Carolyn Casey is the executive director. They've both been on the show about it. Just check it out. It's these 8th grade ambassadors, as they're called, from virtually every city in town that do incredible service.
It's amazing.
It's project351.org.
Okay, we're talking to the Attorney General of the Commonwealth.
I love that you just gave that a plug. I love that.
It's a fabulous
it's an incredible organization with great young people.
Great.
We're going to be back with the Attorney General after the break. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.
970.
So it's the beginning of Pride Month, Attorney General.
Yes.
What's doing in the AG's office?
Well, first, happy Pride Month, because there's a lot going on where folks in the LGBTQ plus community are under attack, not just in Massachusetts, across this country, especially trans youth and youth generally. And so, we're going to be this weekend marching. I'll be marching with GLAD and really proud to be marching with these lawyers and advocates who do amazing work. In addition to that, we're going to be putting out some more information and materials, almost like in the housing space, about what your rights are, what you have access to. But I just will stress there are resources our office has to bring to bear to help folks who are under attack, and we want them to know that. The other thing is, this is not just a Massachusetts effort, it's a national effort. As people are attacking gender-affirming care, we push for reproductive justice and reproductive health care. Gender-affirming care, we have the best doctors in the nation, have said this is healthcare that works, and we know why. And so as that's under attack, we're out there fighting the fight with other AGs across the country in terms of access to healthcare, basic protections, whether it's in the consumer context, public accommodations context, any other context. We're on the front lines. Our Civil Rights Division is active at work. We have a Children's Justice Unit that's working with our school districts every day to take on hate and bullying. And that's true for this context too. And so we're going to do everything we can to protect this community.
Let's go to Rasan. I hope I got that right. In Boston, you're on with the Attorney General. Welcome there.
Good morning.
Morning.
Jim, Marjorie.
Hi.
Hey, wait, is this Rasan? Urban League Rasan?
Oh, no, it is Rasan.
Rasan.
Oh, it's in Hall.
Last name begins with
I
H.
hear your voice. It's quite unique. Is that you?
How are you, Rasan? Why don't you say what your job is these days for those who don't know and your new incarnation?
Thank you, Jim. Rasan Hall, I'm the president and CEO of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts.
Good to speak to you, Rasan.
You too, Jim. You too, Marjorie.
Yeah,
and,
thanks for calling,
Attorney
Rasan.
General Campbell. Absolutely. I just got to say to my sister, you are the manifestation of our ancestors' dreams, and I am so proud of you. So keep up the good work.
You can't have me crying on the radio. Thank you.
So I wanted you, though, to comment on the recent appeals court decision, even though it's out of Georgia, regarding the Fearless Fund. And what does it mean when efforts to intentionally address the deep history of disinvestment and discrimination are being challenged, ironically, based on a law that was used to protect recently emancipated Black people? And what, if anything, is AG's office doing to protect initiatives like this or other diversity initiatives here in the Commonwealth?
By the way, we should just say, for those who don't know, this fund, the VC fund that was issuing grants reserved for businesses owned by Black women, challenged by the same guy who led the affirmative action challenge at Harvard and North Carolina. I'm sorry, Attorney General, take it away.
No, don't be. I appreciate the question, and thanks for
Thanks
the
for
kind words. So more to come, and when I say that is, we are actively working as a team to roll out some things in the near future on how we're going to protect everything related to diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI in all places. So whether that is in the higher ed context, in the business context, and we know folks are using the admissions decision around affirmative action, which was limited to that, admissions with respect to some private higher ed institutions, to try to now take this legal analysis and apply it to DEI. We're saying don't do that. And we want to be thoughtful in how we put out some guidance here. The other piece that we're reviewing and mindful of is these attacks, not just in Georgia, but other places too, that may be under threat, certain types of funds that are dedicated and targeted for certain groups of people. This is ongoing analysis because we know that people are going to be intentional in using some lines of legal analysis to challenge these programs. And we have a role and obligation. We've been working even with our administration, Executive Office of Education, and others since the beginning of this affirmative action decision at the Supreme Court, is to make sure that we are proactively looking at any types of programming and funds that could be under threat to shore those up. So just give us a little bit of time. It's at the top of the list. As you know, we just initially participated in a conversation with you and Malia and some others on the importance of protecting DEI. Right now, we're doing a very thorough and thoughtful analysis. We're also working with some other AGs across the country where we hope to put something out that will have force and be impactful, almost like we did with the MBTA Community Advisory, to give folks guidance. We're getting a lot of questions. But we got to be careful on how we frame some of the analysis and put it out there to the public.
Rasan, it's great to talk to you as always. Good luck. And by the way, the reason this case is particularly important is because it's a private sector entity, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, I didn't know you could do that. But anyway, this is someone who I think needs your help, Mary in Mansfield. She's saying she's a disabled, older homeowner. Has two questions. One, I feel like I'm getting taxed out of my home as the residential taxes just keep going up. Are there any protections for me? And
You
two,
said this was Mary?
Mary in Mansfield. Mass Health sends letters that they have a lien on my home because I receive Mass Health benefits, but I don't know how much and what the interest rate is. Is this legal? How do I get out of it? I thought I paid off my home, but now I find out I haven't. She sounds like she needs some help from somebody.
Yes, Mary, right?
Yeah, can we get her?
Mary should stay on and connect with Lauren and Cindy.
Yeah, can we get her number?
Yes.
Yes.
So we can
We'll
follow
get
up
you.
specifically.
They can get her number.
There are
Mary,
certain protections on certain things. If you're an elder, we obviously have the Elder Justice Unit that we got established for concerns related to elders, disability, other type of things. But hers is so specific. So Mary, please do stay on with us, and we'll follow up.
Yeah, your predecessor, who happens to now be the governor, did these investigations of the Archdiocese of Worcester, Springfield, and Fall River, interviewing a lot of survivors, as we have too through the years, but obviously you have a lot of power. And our understanding is the reports are completed, but you won't release them. Your office won't release them until a court approves the release. Why is court approval needed to release these investigations?
So that happened under my predecessor. I can say that. I can't say anything more. This is an ongoing court-involved matter, and I have to leave it at that.
Well, you can't say even why you won't release them?
I'm
not asking about the content of the reports.
It is ongoing. The investigations were done in a certain way. We now have to engage the court, which we are, and I can't say anything more than that. And I would just say, Jim, similar to other contexts where we have an open matter, open investigation, open complaint, whatever it is, we have to let it go through the entire process before sometimes we can say something publicly. Let me tell you this. As soon as that process is complete, I will mosey myself back here or to the library to explicitly talk about everything related to this.
I'm just looking at my notes about housing, and we were talking about housing earlier on, which is probably the biggest issue in the Commonwealth. And one of the things we forgot to bring
Racial bias.
Right, appraisal bias.
Yeah.
And I know you're focused on that. And explain what it is, if you don't mind, please, Attorney General. And equally importantly, explain what you're doing about it.
So more to come. I have to give a shout out to Sherry Riva in my office, who I actually brought on and created a position that had never existed in the office before, a senior advisor for economic mobility and opportunity. And it was to look across the entire office on ways in which to help people create wealth. And that includes closing the racial wealth gap. So this came to our attention, appraisal discrimination, where folks in certain communities of color, or people of color, were doing their own analysis, and of course there's some studies out there that demonstrated that their value was being appraised far less than their white counterparts. As we continue to engage, there's actually a coalition of folks engaged in this. Sherry is now engaging other AG offices across the country. So we'll come back. We're trying to figure out what all the tools that we have to take on this issue. And it's not just simply enforcement, compliance. I learned even through this, because it was not my expertise, when one of the panel discussions that I participated in, those who do the appraisals, for example, are predominantly white. So even the workforce development piece, which also plays a role as demonstrated by some reports and experts in this area, was astounding to me. So this is at the top of the list in terms of something we will prioritize. And we will come back to folks with a full plan on how we address it. And I will say it will involve other states too that are also seeing a similar appraisal discrimination issues.
Let's try.
And the federal government, of course, has also weighed in on this issue being a major one, including the president.
We're going to try to squeeze one more quick one in. Brian in East Freetown, quickly if you can, with Attorney General Andrea Campbell. Hi, Brian.
Yes. Hello. Thank you for taking the time.
Sure.
I own a small metal fabrication shop, and I'm required to have a DOT number and set up a DOT account with the Department of Transportation. Now, when I did, they sold my information, and I get nonstop mails, calls, scams, and fraud. My question is, how are they allowed to do that when it's a requirement for me to operate my business and my vehicles?
Brian, is it Brian?
Brian, it is, yes.
Brian, can you
ma'am.
stay on just to get a few more details for you? That would be great. Lauren and Cindy, we'll follow up. If you could stay on.
Don't go away, Brian. Stay on the whole line. We'll get your contact info. You'll hear from the Attorney General's office, and good luck with that. Good luck with that. We appreciate it.
We get a lot of texts about things that the Attorney General has nothing to do with, including criminal trials that are going on right now in different courthouses. That's not her purview.
But one thing you also have, there's a very controversial announcement is about to be made at 2 o'clock today by President Biden with some really tough immigration rules, again, by executive order, which would stop asylum seekers from getting into the country unless they had employment once it reaches a certain threshold, and we're way over that threshold. So there's likely to be a stop. What's your reaction from a guy who is very critical of Donald Trump for his egregiously, I think he thought, tough, unfairly tough rules around immigration? What's your quick reaction to that?
Well, I'm going to tune in like everybody else and see the specifics and the details. I will say, no candidate is ever perfect. What I know to be true, though, is why I'm going to be getting out there actively supporting President Biden and Vice President Harris is everything that we're doing, whether it's taking on appraisal discrimination, our housing work, student loan debt, we're wiping out thousands of dollars for constituents, everything to even take on white supremacy. I didn't even mention in Pride Month, we sued a neo-Nazi group, NSC 131, here, not for their beliefs that the world should only look like maybe you, Jim,
Thank you.
but not for their beliefs, but for their conduct of going to public places and targeting, drag story hours in certain communities, right? Yeah. And then blocking our access to these public places and the civil rights of all of us. You need a partner in the White House to not only complement that work, to support it. And the last I checked, hate white supremacy. You can have a job, you can have good housing, but if you are fearful of living authentically who you are, I want a president who's going to stand in partnership with me on those issues, and a vice president. The other guy is not. And so, is everyone perfect? No. I haven't seen the details.
Understand, it's fine.
So we'll
2
see.
o'clock, we'll talk about it in the future.
And then I will just add one piece on
15 seconds, yeah.
on the immigrant space. That also is work we're doing here in Massachusetts to protect folks who are arriving here and giving them everything they need to be successful, which that's why I'm proud to live in Massachusetts.
Great. So, by the way, can you resolve a quick issue in 10 seconds? Howard Powell and the camera are here.
They're
Is that
here.
correct?
Yes.
Margie says they
Okay.
weren't, but just to be
There
clear,
is a
they
camera
are
here, and there is a man, Howard,
It's 2-1. Okay,
sitting
fine.
over there right
All right,
next
so
to
it's
her.
Resolved. It's
We're all
behind
going to
us.
get a little more coffee
Good
at
to
the
see
end.
you.
Thank you
so much for your
Thank you
time.
very much.